My name is Rowan Laird. I'm 39 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've been the silent backbone of Crosshatch Freight Co., tucked into a beige corner office on the third floor of a building no one ever photographs. My title, Senior Operations Analyst, never changed, though the systems I built reshaped how we moved freight across 5 states. I wasn't flashy. I didn't charm executives over cocktails or circulate pep quotes on Slack. I worked early, late, in between, and when the numbers dipped, I found out why. They called me reliable, like it was both a compliment and a lid. I didn't push back. Let the loud ones take credit in meetings while I stayed behind polishing the logic trees that kept everything upright. I never needed applause. I just needed the system to work. And it did, until they stopped looking at results and started chasing something shinier. Today is Thursday, the last of the quarter. There's a review meeting at 10, and after that, people expect me to return to my desk like I always do. Pull performance reports, tweak schedules, mentor the newer analysts who still confuse upstream with downstream. But they won't get that today. Not because I'm angry, not because I was overlooked, because this has been in motion for a while now. Quieter than the noise upstairs, but infinitely more permanent. At 9:58, I slide the envelope into my bag. Heavy cardstock, sealed. My name handwritten in the top corner. I spent longer than I care to admit deciding what to write on that paper, what tone to take, what truths to include. Not everyone would understand. That was fine. I wasn't planning to be understood. I was planning to leave exactly the way I worked, quietly, precisely, and impossible to undo. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and nervous anticipation. I took my usual seat near the back 3 chairs from the wall, same view of the LED screen, same untouched notepad. I'd reviewed the quarterly numbers the night before. Freight efficiency was up, 7.3% bottlenecks in central dispatch were down, and our route optimization software, my software, had finally pushed us below a 2% error rate. It was a solid quarter. But no one looked at me. Adrienne Foster, our Director of Operations, stood at the front with her signature polished poise. She opened with a few wins sprinkled in the usual performance highlights, then shifted. As we evolve into the next phase of growth, she said we're aligning leadership with the energy and vision needed to inspire change. I knew the language before she even finished the sentence. Tessa Rayner sat 2 seats ahead of me, practically vibrating with self-satisfaction. She wore a white blazer lipstick too bold for a freight room, and that newness that only ever worked in rooms where memory was short. She hadn't even been here 18 months. I'd corrected her freight zone coding in March, but here she was smiling like she already knew. After the meeting ended, people shuffled out, offering polite applause and empty congratulations. Adrienne caught my eye and gave the smallest tilt of her head. I followed her down the hall without a word. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Rowan," she began. "I want to start by saying how much we value your work, your consistency, your systems thinking. You've really anchored this team. That was the first red flag. Praise up front always meant a pivot." But she continued after a lot of careful discussion. "We've decided to move Tessa into the Director of Ops role." I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I just waited for her to finish. "There's been a shift in our strategic vision," she went on. "Tessa brings a dynamic energy that aligns with our external-facing priorities. We need visibility, leadership, presence." I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and set it gently on the desk between us. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said quietly. "Thank you for everything." Adrienne stared at the envelope like it had bitten her. "Rowan, I don't think this is necessary. We hoped you'd stay on to support the transition." I stood. I won't be transitioning anyone into a role they didn't earn. And with that, I turned and walked out the silence behind me louder than any applause. The envelope sat where I left it, centered, untouched, stark against Adrienne's glass desk. I didn't look back when I left the room, but I knew she wouldn't open it right away. She would wait. Maybe out of politeness, maybe out of fear. There's something unsettling about a resignation that arrives without anger, without raised voices or bruised pride. Just clarity. No one asked what was in it. They never do. People assume its standard 2 weeks notice may be a list of outstanding projects, the obligatory thank you paragraph. They wouldn't imagine what I'd actually included: dates, framework, references, IP declarations, legal confirmations filed months in advance, a sealed letter addressed not to Adrienne but to the corporate legal team, time-stamped and notarized. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. I'd built something they didn't know existed. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't believe I'd walk away with it still in my hands. In the lunchroom, a few co-workers offered quiet nods. One of the junior analysts, Casey, gave me a sympathetic look but said nothing. The news hadn't traveled yet, or if it had, they hadn't made the connection. They wouldn't understand why I was still calm, why I didn't storm out or beg for reconsideration. They thought I was leaving empty-handed. But what they didn't know was that the envelope wasn't the end, it was the opening move. Something I'd been working toward for years, tucked between long nights, silent weekends, and a system more valuable than any title they could have given me. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop, entered my credentials, and archived the last batch of internal documentation under my personal secure cloud. Nothing proprietary, nothing stolen, just the parts that were always mine. Veer logic started on a whiteboard wedged between my toolbox and a stack of paint cans in the corner of my garage. At first, it was just a series of sketches, reaction flows, frustration scribbled in dry erase ink after long days watching Crosshatch repeat the same operational failures like clockwork. I wasn't trying to build something big. I was trying to stop bleeding time. The patterns were always there. Lost containers, delayed handoffs, wasted miles on routes that could have been optimized with even the most basic forecasting model. But every time I brought it up, I was told to keep it lean or let the new team take a crack. So I stopped trying to convince them and started solving it on my own. The first version was rough-coded late at night after I logged off from Crosshatch, pieced together in an old laptop that wheezed when it compiled. But it worked. Not just to analyze gaps, but to adapt. Veer logic didn't just flag inefficiencies, it rerouted in real time, using live freight data and proprietary algorithms I wrote from scratch. The logic adjusted itself. It learned. Over the next 4 years, I refined it, improved the UI, hired 2 part-time freelance engineers out of Austin, bought a secondhand server stack, and converted the back half of the garage. By year 2, I'd signed 2 licensing deals, small regional freight providers, both under NDAs. Their route loss dropped by double digits. One even offered to back me if I ever went public. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't want the noise. I wanted proof. Meanwhile, Crosshatch ran my internal systems into the ground. One of my models saved them over $3 million in rerouting and error mitigation. They never put my name on the memo. Tessa presented the results at the regional summit, called it a collaborative team success. I stood at the back of the room and watched her mispronounce the core features of a system she'd never seen in its entirety. That was when I stopped waiting for recognition. My resignation wasn't an emotional decision. It wasn't about betrayal or pride. It was timing. Quiet, deliberate timing. They were shifting their structure, chasing optics, betting on charisma. And I'd already built the solution they didn't realize they needed until they wouldn't have it anymore. I filed the last internal handover report, logged out of the system, and shut my laptop. Then I opened another screen, Veer Logic's live dashboard. 2 partner clients, stable flow, no system alerts. I clicked over to the new beta integration queued for next month and activated the build. The day after I handed Adrienne the envelope, I showed up at 8:00 a.m. Sharp, same as always. I nodded at the front desk, assistant swiped my badge, rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, and walked past the same walls that now somehow looked a little thinner. I sat down at my desk, opened my inbox, and started answering emails like nothing had changed. No announcement had gone out, just whispers. A few curious looks, but mostly silence. I didn't want a send-off. I didn't want cake or a card or a clumsy speech about my dedication over the years. I wanted control over my own ending. Clean, quiet, surgical. Each day I closed out one system module, cleaned up archived folders, and downloaded the only things that ever truly belonged to me. My personal process notes, presentation decks I'd built from scratch, my performance logs dated flowcharts and implementation frameworks that had never been officially adopted, not for leverage, not for proof, for truth, for the version of the record that wouldn't get edited later by someone with a better title and a louder voice. I used a private drive I'd created 3 years ago, secured encrypted mine. Not a single file contained proprietary company data. But what they never realized was that so much of what ran this place was custom logic, my logic. Written into scripts, layered into workflows, patched into flawed systems, so subtly they thought it was native. They wouldn't understand what they lost until it unraveled. Late Thursday afternoon, 4 days before my last day, Tessa drifted by my desk. She had a latte in one hand, phone in the other. She leaned her elbow on the edge of my cubicle wall like she owned it. Still here, she asked, grinning like this was a game she'd already won. I didn't look up, still finishing what I built. She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a scoff. Well, good for you. I'd be using PTO by now. But I guess we all have different priorities. I closed a tab and turned to face her, calm and flat. Make sure you understand how the system works, I said. Her smile faltered for half a second, then returned brighter and more artificial than before. I'll be fine. People want fresh energy. I nodded. Fresh energy is good. So is infrastructure. Don't forget the difference. She blinked, then turned away with a toss of her hair and something about a sync call she was late for. I turned back to my screen and continued documenting. Not for them. For the version of this story I knew would one day be rewritten. On my last morning at Crosshatch, I left the house the same way I had every workday for over a decade. Coffee in a thermos badge, clipped to my bag shoes, quiet on the pavement. The difference was internal. No anxiety, no second-guessing, just clarity. I didn't say goodbye. Not out of bitterness, but because it didn't feel necessary. I'd already said what mattered with the systems I built, the standards I left behind, and the envelope still resting in Adrienne's office unopened as far as I knew. At 4:58 p.m., I logged out for the last time. I cleared my browser, powered down the monitor, and left a neat stack of printed handover notes on my desk. Nothing dramatic, just enough to let the absence echo. On the way out, the office manager offered me a small potted succulent in a ceramic mug that read, "Keep going." I thanked her, set it gently in the break room on my way past, and stepped into the elevator. Ethan Webb was waiting in a black sedan just outside the building, parked one space past the employee zone. He didn't wave, just nodded once when I opened the passenger door. We didn't talk much on the drive. He wasn't the small talk type, and neither was I. We pulled into a quiet corner booth at a coffee house in Northeast, the kind of place with no Wi-Fi and handwritten menus. The folder was already on the table, matte black crisp edges, my name on the tab. "This is the final version," he said. "We adjusted for your IP ownership and added full integration rights on your end." I opened it, scanned the terms, equity, autonomy, license control team, selection, and something else I hadn't expected. Co-strategic lead on Halcyon's national freight architecture rollout. It wasn't a role, it was a seat at the table. "You good with it?" he asked. I reached for the pen. I was ready 2 years ago. He slid the pen across the table and I signed just above my printed name, Rowan Laird Co-Architect, Veer Logic Integration Initiative. The system I built in my garage would soon become the operational brain of Halcyon Freight Tech. The transition was no longer hypothetical. It was already underway. 2 months after I walked out of Crosshatch, the first headline hit a regional logistics newsletter. Crosshatch Freight Co. loses 2 major clients amid operational setbacks. It wasn't front-page material, but it made the rounds in the circles that mattered: industry leads, client reps, back-end consultants. I didn't seek it out. The link showed up in a message from Casey, the junior analyst who used to shadow me on optimization audits. "They're melting down. You were the system." I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the message for a moment, then clicked the article. It was blunt. Missed delivery windows, breached SLAs, internal confusion about route prioritization. A quote from an anonymous client said, "The person who used to run our ops accounts clearly isn't there anymore." They didn't name me. They didn't have to. Another message came the following week, this time forwarded from a friend in another company. A smaller blog had picked up an internal leak chat screenshots from staff venting in a private Slack channel. One message read, "Tessa replaced the Monday ops brief with a wellness vision board session." I wish I was kidding. Another one, "We've been told to stop asking detailed questions." It would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. I didn't feel smug. There was no part of me that wanted to gloat. I just felt a steady confirmation deep in my chest, that quiet certainty you get when everything unfolds exactly the way the data said it would. The numbers never lie. The systems either hold or they break. And when they break, you find out who built them. Back at Halcyon, VeerLogic was already reducing route delays by nearly 17% across the first 3 rollout regions. Our pilot team had started calling it the brain. I hadn't asked for that label. They gave it because they felt it. Because something that had always been invisible at Crosshatch was now impossible to miss. The email arrived just after lunch on a quiet Tuesday. The subject line read, "Apology." The sender, Adrienne Foster. I let it sit unopened for a few minutes, not because I was hesitant, just because I didn't need it. Whatever it said, I already knew how the story ended. Still, I clicked it. Rowan. I've been meaning to reach out for weeks, but I didn't know how to say this, so I'll say it plainly. I was wrong. I misread your leadership, undervalued your systems, and dismissed the depth of what you built. And when I handed that role to Tessa, I thought I was choosing vision. I see now I was choosing visibility over substance. Tessa resigned 3 weeks ago. The board has since seen what I should have, that our operations didn't function around you, they functioned because of you. And when you left, the foundation left with you. I've submitted my resignation as well. It felt like the only honest thing left to do. I know this doesn't change anything and it may be too late, but I wanted you to know I see it now. I see you, Adrienne. I read it twice slowly. There was no anger in me, no vindication, just space, distance. Time had already stretched the past far enough behind me that I didn't need closure from it. I typed my reply in one smooth line. "Thank you for your honesty, Adrienne. I wish you clarity moving forward. Rowan." Then I archived the message, closed the tab, and turned my attention back to the new system model we were preparing to present to the board at Halcyon next week. It was time to scale. By the end of the quarter, VeerLogic had fully launched in 5 of Halcyon's regional hubs. The metrics were clear: route loss was down 19%, turnaround speeds up 12%. It didn't need promotion. It proved itself every time a delivery arrived early or a reroute avoided a delay, without anyone lifting a finger. People started calling it the brain. I never asked them to. It started in hallway conversations, then appeared in project briefs, then in team meetings. The system that once lived on a whiteboard in my garage now pulsed through the core of a national network. At Halcyon, I wasn't just tolerated, I was trusted. I led the Systems Innovation Group, a lean but sharp team of engineers, analysts, and logistics designers. Every Thursday morning, I held workshops with newer operations managers, some green, some jaded, all hungry to learn. I didn't give them buzzwords or pep talks. I gave them systems, root logic, and space to think for themselves. We're not chasing noise. I told them last week, standing in front of a flow diagram 3 layers deep. We're building what lasts. Some of them scribbled it down like it was gospel. But I wasn't trying to be profound. I was just stating the truth, the kind that used to get ignored. In this room, though, they listened. They asked questions. They tested ideas. And when something clicked, you could see it in their eyes that moment when operations stopped being chaos and started being architecture. The board had just approved the next phase national expansion, new integrations, broader reach, deeper responsibility. And for the first time, I didn't hesitate. I was ready. The email came late in the evening's subject line, CEO role discussion. I didn't recognize the name at first, board liaison interim rep, but the content was familiar. Polished language, carefully constructed regret. They were offering me the top job at Crosshatch. We believe you are the only person who can restore operational stability and rebuild trust within the organization. We'd like to discuss your return as Chief Executive Officer. I read it once, then again, not because I was tempted, but because part of me needed to see it in writing. The same company that once deemed me not a culture fit was now asking me to lead it. Not because they'd finally seen me, but because they couldn't fix what they broke. I didn't overthink the reply. Thank you for the offer. I'm not interested in returning to rebuild what I've evolved beyond. I hit send and closed my laptop, the air around me quiet in a way that felt earned. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about standing exactly where I belonged at the helm of something I built, not something that once failed to see me. My home office isn't much, just a reclaimed desk, matte walls, and a framed quote above my monitor. Too focused on results. The words that once kept me out of a promotion now hang like a banner. They meant to diminish me. Instead, they defined me. Veer Logic holds 3 patents now. We're in licensing talks with 2 European carriers and a Southeast Asian retail network struggling with last-mile failures. What started in silence has become a standard. This morning, I recorded something simple. No backdrop, no polish. Just me speaking directly to the camera. If you're someone who builds in the background, who stays late while others perform, who gets told you're too quiet, too technical, too focused, listen carefully. You don't need to be loud to lead. Just build what works. The world will catch up. I uploaded the video, closed the tab, and leaned back in my chair. What was really in that envelope and how many people knew the truth too late? Can charisma replace competence? Or does quiet mastery always rise? When legacy is on the line, what kind of leader do you choose to be?